Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions on a Friday. It's Friday. End of the week, again on lockdown, but still fun. Today with us, he's back. Liran Hirschkorn is in the hot seat, and so is John Hefter as well from Thrasio. And we are awaiting Brandon Young. He's probably sitting in one of his cars going through traffic now, working out how he's going to get online in time and join us in a few minutes. But that's all good. John, what have you been up to in the last couple of months since we last spoke?
Yeah, so it's been a very active time for Thrasio. We actually had a record number of acquisitions, both in sales volume and actual brands purchased, as well as seeing massive growth across our entire Amazon portfolio, almost exclusively dealing with crazy COVID stockouts and just completely unpredictable. We had a piece of sports equipment in the UK that went from selling $600 a day to $112,000 a day till we stocked out. Yeah. So you have events like that you really you're trying to manage. It's been a very stressful time for a lot of people across the world. It's been fruitful for us, but we're cognizant also of everything the world is dealing with and trying to navigate our way through it the best that we can.
Danny.
Cool.
Can I ask John some questions?
Yeah, of course you can.
Cool. And I see Brandon joined as well.
There he is.
Yeah, John, interesting. I just I had a seller on my podcast yesterday that just sold her business at the beginning of the year or end of last year. And how are companies like a Thrasio or others sort of looking at buying brands now? Let's say I just had an amazing 2 months in my business because of COVID. Can I leverage that in my trailing 12 months? I would expect that maybe there would be some discount on that valuation based on that.
Discount is not necessarily the word I would put. It's just like, most of our deals that we do now have some sort of earn-out attached to it, right? So we would just do what we call like a stabilization play, whereby if the sales continue at the way they were at that run rate, then you would get paid as if the multiple was based off of that run rate. If there was a decrease, then we would both kind of go down in scale. And we think that's the most sort of like equitable way to sort of manage that sort of scenario. And obviously we're going to be running into that because there are certain categories and things that it just went bonkers, right?
Yeah.
When this whole thing
and the same way on the other side, right? There are people who had products, that travel products or whatever it is that saw massive decline and maybe don't want to sell, but if there's that upward trajectory after, looking at those negative months with a certain eye of knowing why that happened.
Our goal, like Liran, I'll be very quick with this, is just to be like fair and flexible. The environment's always changing, and at the end of the day, we want people happy who sold to us because they're our biggest advocates for future business. So we try to put deals together that makes sense from a practical standpoint, and people feel like winners at the end for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Danny, you can take over your show now.
Thank you. Welcome to this show, Brandon. Your light balance there is leaving you a little bit blue. Are you feeling a bit blue today?
I'm very, very blue, man.
Yeah. How was the journey in? Because you commuted, did you? You went to the office from home, 10 minutes.
Yeah. There's still not a lot of traffic. It's pretty light.
Excellent. Cool. So good to have you back. I haven't had you on for a few weeks. Liran, it's been all but 3 days since I see you.
We discuss in our office, right? Yeah. Which on how the trajectory of Amazon verticals has gone through over time. We have tons of brands now. It's well over 50. So they're in tons of different verticals. We see patterns across the board. There's a couple things down like travel and auto. They seem to be recovering a little bit now. Everything else seems to be sort of on this rocket ship. And if you look at e-commerce in general, in an 8-week period, we basically had 10 years of advancement, right? So what I mean by that is e-commerce was 13% of the overall retail market, right? It picked up 10 points in a period of 8 weeks if you just take that run rate, adjusted rate. Now, when we obviously think that's going to sort of like settle back down at some point to a certain degree, but we're also very cognizant of the fact that people's habits and behavior patterns, once they get adjusted, there's a tendency for them to stay on for a longer period of time. And with all of the risk calculations that people are making, where it's like my health is on the line if I decide to go to Costco today, right? Or that I decide to go to Target. The idea that that's just going to disappear, even after perhaps we're fortunate enough to have some level of vaccine or treatment that makes the death rate or more data that shows that it's negligible to a certain degree. I think those patterns will change forever. However, I don't think it will, the rate that's sort of this exacerbated, 9 to 12 week period, we believe it's going to settle to a point. And what my curiosity is around is like, all right, in the US, we have the Prime Day push to the fall, right? We have Chinese manufacturers trying to catch up from their own COVID crisis. We have limited flights happening, which makes air shipping tough. Like, how do we get ready for Q4, right? And at the time to talk about it is now. I put a lot out there. I want to share with you. I want to hear your guys' opinion on this. But that's the sort of stuff that we're sort of dealing with from a business perspective at our office.
That makes sense. And where can you see it going at the moment? What kind of adjustments have you made? Obviously, air shipping's gone up. It's increasing costs there. Where are you countering the balance there? Where are you finding the money to balance that off? Or are you now adjusting to bring all in by sea and adjust your timelines and your cash flow forecasting accordingly?
Yeah, I mean, look, we made the decision internally to go very heavy on inventory, to work hard on renegotiating with our general suppliers, to finding more reliable suppliers in general, and working on playing the long-term game. And we put a ton of money into inventory to basically be able to manage any patterns odd patterns that might occur in Q4. Yeah. And that's our plan, is to be well over prepared. We realize that not every Amazon seller has the ability to do that, but we think it will give us a strategic advantage, and other sellers in the market who have that ability should consider it.
Yeah. And Brandon, you got a team on the ground in China. What are you doing preparing for this year's Q4?
We're mostly focused on the next few months right now. We had a lot of products in the pipeline that we had put off for because of the virus. We've got about 20 products that we're launching in the next 45 days. So we're a little backlogged. Every week, what we're doing is basically each of my team members have to present at least 3 products that they think we should do. And then I spend a call with them going through each of those products. So there's 4 team members that are in charge of running products right now that are, like, we call them salespeople. And so we have like 12 potential products plus any that I throw to them. And I can mix those in too. So I'll do a few hours of research every week. And then there's things like notes that I have from different events and conferences or shows that I've been to, where I'll send them stuff. But for the most part, we aren't really adjusting too much to the virus. We think that things will somewhat either normalize or not. But the reality is that shopping online is just going to continue to go up regardless. We think that Amazon still represents by far the best ROI for your investment dollars and for our growth. On overall retail, even if there is a massive recession, stock market goes down, unemployment doesn't recover, doomsday scenario, I think retail will go down, be abysmal. A lot of places will go out of business. But the reality of it is that online shopping will just go up during that same exact period of time.
Sharon said, oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, Danny. I mean, if you think of like sort of what's been typical Q4 buying behaviors, like buying online, and where else historically is like shopping malls, right? Like we all have these images of packed malls a few days before Christmas, right? Of people buying their last minute gifts. That's sort of a very unlikely scenario to occur this year, right? With a lot of people in close proximity to each other in shopping stores, or the Black Friday, videos we've seen of people jumping all over each other to get into Walmart, right? To grab those, waiting overnight for those Black Friday deals. It's kind of like all that stuff is just unlikely scenarios that we're gonna see this year, and all that money has to be spent or is going to be spent somewhere else, and that I think being online, and obviously Amazon being a big beneficiary of that. So will Target and Walmart.com and other destinations, but and the possibility of what people are talking about is a second wave, right? Like you can argue that weather could or could not be a factor. There are some people that say the reason why New York was hit so hard, partly there's obviously a lot of congestion and proximity of people, partly could be the weather, and it could be as fall comes back, as the country opens up, there might be a second wave, and that will obviously impact Q4 even in a bigger way. So all these things together would indicate to me that Q4, this will be a historic, sort of Q4 for online sales, and especially Amazon.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've got some comments in the feed here. Obviously, Sharon, start with her, said hello at the beginning of the show. Side B says, more lockdown legends. Is this day 1000? It's starting to feel that way. John had a great point. Q4 is going to be very much about inventory. So does this give China sellers an edge? Do you think they will be strategic enough to see this as an advantage? Throw that over to you, Brandon, first, and then back to John.
So I don't think that Chinese sellers have an edge right now. I think that they're in a position where Americans have an edge, more so moving forward. And I'll try to sort that out. You've seen a situation where you've had a lot of issues with shipping, and now accounts are becoming harder and harder to create. The buzz within all of the WeChat communities, the Chinese communities, is that Amazon is becoming less friendly for Chinese sellers. So we've seen that they're starting to do facial recognition. They're starting to require a lot of different types of verification for IDs. And, you can go to your neighbor in China or go to like a poorer area in China and hire a guy for a little bit more than he's actually supposed to make and take his ID and create an Amazon account, right? And then fire him and keep the account as part of his agreement. And that's something that a lot of large sellers are doing. But for the most part, a lot of people lost their accounts trying to sell masks, a lot of PPE. There's thousands of sellers that were down, that are still down and unable to get their account back. And I think that trend of leveling the playing field is going to continue. I think when I looking at training the more I hire Chinese sellers or Chinese employees, the more advantages that I see Americans have as well, because I think that while they're good at maybe the data and they're good at running maybe PPC and they're good at figuring out how to optimize a listing, they're not good at initially selecting the product. They're not good at that initial research phase. They're not good at the data to choose the right product. And then they're definitely not good at writing the listing in an optimized sense from the beginning, from a keyword perspective. So I think that we're going to continue to have opportunities over the Chinese sellers here.
Brandon, how has the landscape kind of changed with Chinese sellers as far as like black hat manipulation and ranking and brushing and all that stuff? I mean, is that still something that's very prevalent, would you say, or has Amazon?
So for some, for a fact, like I know of brokers that used to sell data for competitors, right? Like they would actually sell you the store data, so you could see the PPC information and all that.
You're talking about like ASIN reports?
You would get their business reports and their PPC reports and like for their storefront for X amount of time. Those guys are out of business, right? Like they're few and far between and very difficult to find if you can even find them, which means Amazon has gone in and cleaned house. Like they've been finding out through infiltration and like who's selling these reports, and they're setting them up and then firing them, which is great. So some of those advantages that you're seeing that these sellers had, they just don't have anymore. And then on the American side, or at least for all sellers to help, you've got more power with brand registry. You've got more protection with brand registry. So they're doing more to empower us to protect ourselves. They're doing more to prevent some of those hacks from being effective. and they're eliminating the dirty players that are working within the company. I think that trend will continue. I know a lot of people thought doom and gloom a while ago, and I was thinking, I think it's only going to get better when they started making some of these adjustments. I think now we're starting to see the fruit of that. I've seen a lot less attacks lately, than in the past. And
according to recently, from what I've seen in Marketplace Pulse, there's been sort of a growth in the amount of the top sellers from U.S. versus China. It's the first time I've seen recently sort of like a decline among the Chinese in the data on just like top sellers on Amazon.
Yeah, I think that trend is partly because of all the suspensions. You're talking about thousands of large sellers that lost their accounts that are trying to get it back because they decided to throw up like 10 different listings of masks as toys and different categories just to try to like circumvent without paperwork and all that stuff. So I think a lot of that has to be contributed to that, but I think also it's a combination again of that move that Amazon's making to try to protect the sellers, regardless of where you're from. I mean, it's not necessarily to protect American sellers; it's just to protect sellers in general from some of these attacks. Now, John, you deal with a ton of best sellers, so you're constantly the target of attacks. So,
one of my questions is going to be to John is, what do you do in due diligence to make sure you're not picking up a dodgy account, with lots of black hat on it? Like, do you have identifiers, as part of your process? You're doing a sweep.
Yes.
Have you come across that? Sorry, I'll let you.
Yeah, no, so like early on for us, it was a problem as part of our growing phases. And we've built I think best in class sort of black hat identifying system. That's sort of part of our secret sauce. So we go into deals with very high confidence. And if we don't, then we're protected on what we might pay for something. If it seems, or we just don't, or we don't involve ourselves with it all. I'm going to reiterate a little bit what Brandon said. It's sort of like the modus operandi of the Chinese seller, which is sort of like, eat it all now and let the devil have the hindmost sort of mentality of running 1,000 accounts at once and letting 40% of them get suspended, and trying to just do every black hat tactic that exists to get yourself up. Pays in the short run, but for the long run, playing it clean is the best way for a better future tomorrow, right? And there's a lot of maybe socio-cultural reasons why that exists in China. We've also seen some of the same stuff that Brandon has seen. A lot of our categories where things were very dirty and we had to deal with a lot of bad things, let's say, have cleaned up and gone quiet. So that to me is a recognition of Amazon's diligence in trying to clean up their ecosystem. It's certainly not perfect, and there's certainly problems that arise, but I think it's heading in the right direction, let's say. And for me, as an American seller, why I don't worry about Chinese sellers as much as some might is when I go to Amazon and I'm just a customer myself, and that's how I look at any business that we might want to buy or any rebranding effort that we want to do. All I'm looking for in my subconscious is trust. Trust. What do I believe in? And for whatever reason, culturally, we are much more adept at presenting trust in a forthright manner to the American consumer. And it's a really hard thing to replicate. And so I think if you do a good job presenting your brand, you care about the quality of your product, and you're willing to make adjustments with your suppliers, and you put that whole package together, and you're obviously savvy with all the other pieces you need to be in the business, you're at a massive advantage over a traditional Chinese seller. And for the most part, we've been able to override some pushes from those types of sellers and overcome those obstacles.
Do you also think it's down to, people's obsession with black hat and stuff is sometimes not a cop out, but people are so focused on, because of the black hat, finding other reasons, and really, is it as big and as rife as it suggested to be? Like, like when stuff spreads around the industry, it spreads, right? So we all know that bad news travels faster than good news. So do you think it does play a role there? Is almost sometimes is a cop out, because it's very easy just to blame black hatters without necessarily looking at your business. Am I selecting the right products? Am I going down the right channels? Am I doing the right thing? If you're going to go and compete with a Chinese factory in Shenzhen, they're always going to be able to put that out cheaper than you would be, because daddy or mummy runs the factory, or their brother. Or do you see what I mean? So do you think there's a cop out there? And the same.
Look, there's a pathology amongst any group of seller communities or business community where finding a source of blame becomes a comfort, right? So
blame shifting,
and certainly, and you're going to see that at when you're talking with people in your community. So that's certainly part of it. So without a doubt, I lost. I had a much better point, was my second one, but I've lost it. So I heard Brandon talking. We'll go on to you, man.
Yeah, there's actually a message here. I want to, because some of them are not coming up in the feed here correctly. Sharon says, Brandon, my people in China have told me that the situation with factories is really bad and is not as people think. Some factories turned out to selling stock from their cars and making markets for their cars, etc. Do you have any insight on this with your team in China?
Well, we haven't. All right. So I know that a lot of factories that converted to selling masks are in a bad position, right? So they've taken position like machinery and they've moved it from what they were normally making, and then they bought these expensive rigs to make masks. These machines that are normally $20,000 were $100,000 at the height of all this, and they were investing heavily into it. And then the price of masks went from, they could sell them at $1.50 all the way down. Now it's like 70 cents, right? Like, so and then that the aftermarket effect of that is that mask that people were selling for $3, you can now find for, $1.70, $1.50. So, what has that done where it's starting to normalize? The demand has gone way down and they've made a major shift in their business, and they're stuck with all this inventory. Plus, many of them can't export anymore because of regulations with CDC and the FDA. They got removed from a whitelist or the EUA list that they were using to import. So many of them are stuck with millions of masks, tons of money output. I think factories are in trouble from that perspective. As far as, raw material disruptions are another issue that we've seen, because not everything originates in China. But for the most part, anything that originates in China and can be made in China is probably the most stable source of products anywhere in the world right now, because you have everybody at work, no outbreak of the virus, everything is pretty much up and running. So I think sourcing from China and I wouldn't worry about the factories, as long as your raw materials, if you know your supply chain and you know where your raw materials are coming from, if it's coming from China and being made in China, you're probably going to have an advantage over a lot of people that are still sourcing in areas where there might be some issues with the virus or disruptions.
We just had, obviously, was it the last quarter was Amazon's biggest in history, right? Is that right? Was it last quarter?
Yes.
Yeah. What's your predictions, go around the room, what's your predictions for Q4 this year? Because obviously, if the virus reoccurs, do we end up going, people buy as much gift stuff? Is their habits changing? The type of gifts that if they're not going to see families, we get a reoccurrence. Therefore, they'll send them as wrapped gifts from Amazon directly to their friends, family, etc. What kind of impacts can you see Q4 having from your point of view, starting with Liran?
I mean, I think it's going to be the biggest Q4 Amazon has ever seen. There's going to be more online shopping, and to me, the holiday season is one of those things where people stretch. Even if you don't have a job, you're going to want to buy gifts for friends, family, even if you may be spending a little bit less money this year. I think it's one of those emotional things, right? You don't want to leave your kids without something, right? And I think people are going to go online to buy more than ever this Q4. So despite the economy, I still think it's going to be the best Q4 Amazon has seen.
Yeah, definitely for Amazon. And as we've seen, is last quarter, Amazon's had their best quarter, but that's not always the same for sellers, because it depends on the type of goods that they've seen, as we've seen with the restrictions and stuff. Throwing it over to you, Brandon. What's your take? What's your predictions for this Q4?
Yeah, I don't see Amazon getting smaller. I think it would be a really, really bad state of the economy if it goes down. because the numbers just from Q1 and from the numbers throughout the lockdown and the quarantine were, retail down 20%, Amazon up 10%. Yeah. So, you're talking about overall down, and that might be the case for this Q4. You might have less spending as compared to 2019, but I think Amazon will grow, and I think online shopping will grow. I think e-commerce this accelerated what the inevitable was anyway. We've been shifting in our economy to an e-commerce economy, and we weren't close. I think we were at 25% of all retail was happening online as of last year. So, I think that'll get closer and closer to 50% and more. And if you look at what the buying habits of a nation that like China is almost all e-commerce. And so I think that we have a long way to go, and they're a great case study to look at to see what type of e-commerce, what buying habits, what types of products are people going to buy more and more. Although the culture is different, you still have a lot of room to go with regards to online shopping and e-commerce.
Yeah. What's your take, John?
Look, I agree with both of you guys. For the most part, we're preparing again for a massive influx of inventory across most of our portfolio. I think there are some places where caution could be merited. If you are in a category that relies solely on sanitation products, or even things that are like arts and crafts, right? That parents were desperately looking for like something for their kids to do, and the numbers went like beyond berserk. We had one of those happen to us. As schools reopen, I don't expect that sort of like crazy increase to stay the same. Perhaps as gyms open up, if you're in health and fitness and you've been selling stretchy bands or whatever you're selling, like you might see a difference. So it is on a case by case basis, but in general, I see the same pattern as the other guys. Going quickly back to the supply chain thing, in China, we've had tons of suppliers there. It's been exceptionally healthy. And if you're worried about black hat sellers, consider the types of products that you launch. Are the categories themselves dirty or likely to be? And the one metric that we use in-house when we consider product launches is like, how cheap is the product to produce? How low risk is it to be dirty, right? And I think if you use that one factor for yourself to consider it, if you can pull it off, you'll probably be in a much more safe environment when it comes to dealing with those types of sellers.
John, other than, let's say, like supplements, which is kind of known also to be very, sort of combative, or maybe even health and beauty in general, from products out of China and categories, do you see one category being more black hat versus another, or is it more around price?
No, it's somewhat related to price, but there certainly are categories that, for whatever reason, seem to just like bring the snakes out of the grass, so to speak. And again, the one thing I would use is just like, if it's really cheap to produce, where you could get 10,000 units for a really low cost point, and the margins are relatively high, and there isn't a lot of like technology that would make the product special, then like you're rife for something likely difficult to happen, and you just need to be aware that if you're going to do that, you have to be prepared for it. Yeah. So I'm not saying don't launch in those categories. You just have to know that that's part of the picture you have to put together.
Yeah, for us, it's electronics, and anything made in China that's made in Shenzhen that's electronics based. A lot of those electronic accessories, they fit exactly what you're saying: dongles and cables and
lightning cables
cases and so you've got things that cost 50 cents that you can sell at a very high margin. You can give away a bunch of units and burn through them, and the ROI, the factor, I think the biggest thing, John, that I've seen and Liran, is that there's an like the factor of the cost of creating a new account and launching a new account. They have to factor that now. Whereas before, like, it was so easy to get burner accounts where they could just throw a bunch of stuff up, cheat their way to the top, sell a bunch of units. If the account got shut down, oh well, they would just do it again and repeat the process. That fact that they're making it much harder to open accounts is really slowing that down, because it's no longer profitable from a time and perspective, or as feasible.
Okay, I'm just going to say some hellos to the people in the feeds here. So Rick's here, Daniel, Annalise is back, Anna, Lou is here, Matt Parker, I'll get to your question in a moment. Gemma is here, David, Graham Henley, Tiffany Bax said, what's up, guys? Mohammed is here, Sharon, Max, Oxy is here, Jamie Graham, as we all know, Chris is here, Nabra here. Lee Chapman as well, Phil Hadfield, and Troy. Jake is with us as well. Juan is here. Elizabeth Olsen Green also. So Miriam said, great point, John, to consider how cheap the product is we are sourcing. Will a design patent protect us a bit more? Again, comes down to the product, whether that's going to be, a patent, that's fair enough, but it's going to be down to your category as well. Anyone want to share any opinions there?
Intellectual property is important for protecting yourself. It's also time consuming, right? So you have to measure those two things out. I think if and does the novelty of your IP actually serve a customer's need, right? So there's a lot of things differentiate you enough from the market. There's a lot of things to consider when you go down that realm. We've done some of it ourselves, and we've been fairly successful with it. But it is like, to do it right, it's not easy.
And then you've got to challenge it as well, so there's time spent on that side, regardless you've got a patent or not. You're spending time with people challenging that. So it's going to depend on obviously the strength the patent's strong, but it's your attitude towards it and how you're defending your patent as well.
Yeah, for patents, I want to ask: are you doing design patents or are you doing utility patents?
Depends on the category. Depends on the product. Really, so we're working on both. Design patents are obviously much easier, but we have a team of people who are sort of working on things that we think are disruptors in the market to do both. And then we have some stuff that's just really like minor design patent adjustments to work around some other ones that are silly in other countries like China and things like that. Because their rules for patents are entirely different than ours, and so that you can have something that in the US hasn't been patentable for 50 years that they're allowed to do over there as a utility patent, which can make things, difficult. So there's like cute little workarounds like that we have to figure out from time to time.
I think like John said, design patents are much easier and faster to get. They're also
much easier to get around.
Yeah, the downside is that a slight change, you can really copy that design and make a slight change, and then it's a question of do you want to go to battle with somebody in court over that as well. I've had that. The other way you can differentiate your products is through molds, right? And like creating some products where there's cost to the molds, and other people may have to put in a bunch of money in order to create a similar product.
Chris Scramlich says, any of you sourcing in other countries now due to delay and high costs with shipping from China?
No.
Yes.
No. Yeah. What are you doing then, John? Do you want to give a little bit of background there?
Yes. I mean, look, it's so product dependent, right? At this point, look, we're looking for redundancies. We have to, at the scale that we're at now. We're just playing in a different game as far as like who's looking at our business and how they're looking at it. And we are looking for places where other countries, the Bangladesh, Pakistan of the world, Vietnam, can produce goods that are of equal quality that we have now at a lower cost or just a clean redundancy. I think it's important. It's not important for every seller. Don't get me wrong, but for us, it is something we consider. And to be frank with you too, we've also added some U.S. suppliers, which makes me sort of happy as an American that we've been able to do that, and particularly in some towns like Toledo, Ohio, and places like that could really use a boost.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Anyone want to add anything here to the conversation?
Yeah, I think with regards to sourcing out of China, the immediate rush was when the virus was happening in China. It was like, hurry up, diversify. And then China got it under control, and now everywhere else is kind of screwed and having disruptions. And shipping, dealing with customer service. I know a lot of people are big fans of, producing in India and Pakistan, textiles. like we haven't been able to really find a good source for toys at a good price outside of China. That's a category that we kind of have to stay there. But we can get our men's bags line, like our men's bag line, which has been down a lot because people aren't traveling. But we can get that in Mexico. We can get that in South America. We can get that in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, right? Like any textiles you can get all over the world. But for the most part, we feel like the most stable ecosystem right now and supply chain is going to continue to be China. Even within the US, we've had issues like sourcing things. So it's amazing. Are you doing machinery or what type of products are you doing, John? Like what kind of?
I mean, really like all the textile things, some like spice and staple stuff like that, leather goods, things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
Are most of what it is comprised of now. And then we're actually looking into other things that could advance the sort of product type, right? But yeah, so it's mainly in the textile sort of format now. I'd say is the majority of what we're doing.
John,
So we're looking to kind of move to other places.
Yeah, we found that when we looked for textiles within the US that we had an issue. Craftsmanship was good, but it was too slow, right? Yep. If I needed to order too many units, then there was a big issue with that.
For US, the main stuff that we produce is things that are liquid and have weight to them, right? They seem to be
save on the shipping, but you cost a little bit more to make, right?
Yes, yeah, and then it can get like high volume stuff that can get shipped in right away. It's just easier to deal with on the supply chain stuff that seems to be working really well for us, which makes me happy.
John, do you find that the minimums of what you're looking to create in the U.S. is much higher, that it's maybe easier for a Thrash to get a U.S. supplier? But I know a few years ago I looked for one of my products. It was just starting out, on a product, and I needed to produce like 10,000 units in order to try to even get it in the U.S. or even have a supplier kind of get back in touch with me. Versus obviously going to China, you can have such a low MOQ. Is that you find kind of still the case with a lot of the U.S. sources?
I would say that's fair. Like we use our leverage with every supply chain negotiation that we have. Right? We tell them who we are. We tell them our scale, and that definitely has an impact on the sort of responses we get from suppliers and how they treat us.
Yeah, there might be that weird donut hole where if you want 500 units or 1,000 units, you're gonna like run into shops that are willing to do that, but then they can't produce 10,000. Right. And then the guys that can produce 10,000 don't want to deal with you unless you order 10,000.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. You're caught between stools. Sharon says Trump closing passenger flights to America from China, leaving only express or sea shipping. This will affect air shipping pricing again, just as we're stabilizing. Ocean freight seems to be the only way to go. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, I think Chinese airlines, right? I think was something that just came out as far as the ability to fly into the U.S. But yeah, I mean, air shipping rates have gone up, tremendously. So obviously, if you could do ocean shipping and get it in time, some lightweight products, you could still do it, especially if you need to get it in quickly and not lose momentum on Amazon. Sure. So I think you need to weigh all that.
For me, it's weighing one thing when you're considering that is, are you going to be out of stock for more than 30 days? If you are, the recovery can be just really difficult and long, right? And that's sort of like the baseline. We use those other factors too, but for us, that's the core principle. Sometimes you need to sacrifice a little bit today to pay for tomorrow, and some of that is keeping in stock within that relative time frame.
Yeah. I don't think also as well people realize when they say, "Oh, stop manufacturing in China and find another country," that can take months, like 6 to 8 months, because by the time you get samples, build up relationships, start with lower MOQs, screw up what you're doing with your current flow of inventory, working from both territories until you get the handover. It's just saying, "Oh, I'm going to switch it over to India or wherever it is," isn't as easy as it sounds. It's quite a complex process. A bit of science, a bit of art. Would you agree?
100%. It's hard.
Yeah. Anything else you want to cover before we go, guys?
I mean, for me, I just like the topic of COVID in general, and sort of like what I'm hearing on the ground is sort of what what's happening.
Let's do it.
I'm lucky to be in the Boston area. There's obviously a lot of high level research labs here, and sort of people that some of them I'm friends with who are closer to the front lines on vaccines and sort of how those timelines will be sped up. And I've been spending a lot of time too, just anecdotally. Obviously, I don't, this is not my expertise, but learning about relative death rates and sort of how those things are extrapolated. And what I've heard from the medical community is that the vaccine is possibility is moving faster than any vaccine has ever before, and it's by a significant margin. And the likelihood that that we could have something by late fall, is actually relatively high. Now, as they're approving, they're so cheap to produce, they're actually producing the vaccine vials themselves, and they'll trash them if they don't work. Right now, how to get them in the U.S. to 320 million, 350 million people? That's a massive logistical challenge. I don't think we'll be ready for it. I'm also reading out of Lombardi that the veracity of the disease has declined significantly. All viruses are sort of designed in a way to where they want their host to survive, so they can pass on the virus to someone else in the most basic term. And the research that's come out of Lombardi is that the mortality rate of the disease is on the decline. The other piece that I find fascinating to me is I just look at a place like New York, where I was for 10 days prior to the whole thing happening, 2 trips back and forth. It's very weird. I can kind of feel it in the air. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but there's estimates that 20 to 30% of the metro area has had the disease, right? And then if you know that 40% of those deaths plus were nursing home deaths, and I don't know what the number is today, but you take the general population, you multiply it by 0.25, which is that middle number between 20 and 30%. And then you measure that against the death rate, like, the actual mortality rate of this disease is probably lower than we thought. And this is from someone who pulled his kids out of school early, right? Like Brandon, I was following this very early on. We had to, because of the type of business that we run. Now, that doesn't mean that even with all of these potentially positive things, if they were to come to fruition, that policies will suddenly change and everything will just open up. I don't think that will happen. And, who's to say? But I also don't think that the psychological changes, and you could call it modifications or damage, however you want to put it, for this disease, and the thought of human contact being a problem for your safety, I think will carry on for years, right? And that's one of the catalysts that I think will drive Amazon sales and e-commerce sales, further up in the future. So that's
when would you say?
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, when do you feel that, like in layman's term, when do you feel is the next time you can go to, I don't know, a McDonald's, or you can go to a movie theater and sit next to someone who's not your family? How far off do you honestly think that is?
Look, I think my feeling is that's a while off, and I don't think from a practical safety standpoint that's a reality. It's the psychological triggering, and it's the fact that politicians don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
So they could care less about small businesses going under. They don't want to be the guy who opened up too early, and then that had then caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. So we have a federalist system in this country, which means it's sort of being done on a state-by-state basis. And I think it's going to be slow. Look, we're in one of the heaviest hit states here in Massachusetts. It's really slow here, right? I mean, we're still talking about, like, I see people with masks with their windows up in their car. And I live in a small leafy town that's had 15 cases steady for, 90 days, right? You know what I mean? So like, but the attitude certainly, I think, will extend. There is an argument to be made that some of the political unrest and the rioting that's existing here is going to force sort of a loosening up of standards. But I think we'll wait and see. And in an election year, I think people are going to be extra safe. So my guess is that at least on a partial basis, this sort of behavior patterns will last, into the end of this year.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on it.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I agree with John. I think that the overall mortality rate is lower than what was shown. Like it's not 3% or 5%. It's probably somewhere below 1% and above 0.3%, right? So their numbers are very wide, and especially if you back out like the really elderly. I think that we're in a position where a lot of the country is probably safe to open. Depends on how much travel in and out of the area, but I think that these demonstrations that we're having right now, the protesters, are going to probably facilitate another spike in the cases. Florida yesterday had the most cases they've had because it's about 2 weeks from Memorial Day when everyone had a barbecue, right? And so like you see those issues, and 1,000 people died in the U.S. yesterday. I mean, that's a lot of people, right? Like, after 2 days, you've lost as many people as 9/11 from a virus. Now, there's a lot of people in the country that still think it's a hoax because their area wasn't hit very, very hard. And I think a lot of the country is probably safe to open. I think it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, it's a federalist thing, but at the end of the day, you could have isolated each area, restricted travel in and out, and then just started merging together areas that had no cases for X amount of days, right? You could have just like populated the United States and been like, yeah, fully open. Movie theaters, like go see your neighbors. Like we know we're safe here in this large section of area because we've controlled it, but Americans don't like to be restricted of any rights, including travel, and so we're an ignorant bunch, but we're a free bunch, and so we're gonna do what we want to do. We're gonna go out and protest. We're gonna go out and not wear masks if we think it's a hoax, and some people are gonna get sick and die from it.
How do we get around this?
Sorry. I was gonna say one thing that's fascinating to me. I've been reading up on is, and again, I'm not giving medical advice, but the correlation between vitamin D rates and high levels of symptoms. Or they found one of the areas that got hardest hit or people group were North Africans in Scandinavia, right? They're vastly vitamin D deficient, right? And so we've been telling people to like hide indoors, right?
Which is going to cause vitamin D deficiency as well.
Yeah, it's going to cause which to me is like anyway, it's a very sad but fascinating,
the virology of it, where certain vitamins can protect you and certain. Like it's just genetics can play a large part, underlying conditions, all those things are a major factor. We just don't know enough about it.
What about places like Sweden, Japan, where like I think Sweden didn't even lock down. Everyone was up in arms and they had like 90 deaths.
Well, they have the highest per capita in Europe now. Like
what Sweden does.
Yeah, but I would say
everyone was pointing at them and saying, "Hey, look, they're staying open," but now like they lead in deaths per million or whatever.
So I would say that they certainly should, right, by the nature of the behavior pattern they took. How will that play out over time? If the like
as far as the economy goes versus
they do. There's 4,562 deaths,
and also eventual deaths. If we're talking about like building some level of herd immunity, who knows if they did it? I'm not one to say, but like. If that actually happens, you can make an argument that the safest place to be in the world right now would be Northern Italy, right? Because the antibodies that are built up in the general population is significantly higher than a place like South Dakota that's had, I don't know how many cases they have, probably not that many, right? So it's that will be interesting to see from an economic standpoint and from a human cost standpoint how that experiment.
The scary part of that, John, the scariest part of that thinking is, what if the virus wasn't 0.3% and it was in reality 5% or 15 or 20%, right?
Yeah.
Like, over time. And so we don't want to necessarily learn a lesson from this virus and try to relate it to the next outbreak. And I think that the problem is in Americans, it's like, I live in South Florida. We get hurricane warnings all the time. And it's like, if we hadn't had one in a while, then everyone panics. And it's like, panic buying preparation, like windows up, and it's like a week. The hurricane's a week out, but we're in this giant cone, so everyone's panicking.
Yep.
And then eventually it turns up and goes away. And so then the next time a hurricane, or the third time a hurricane comes, and everyone sees it, they're like, "Oh, it's just going to turn," and then it just doesn't, right?
Yep.
And the same thing can happen with this virus, which is we can get herd immunity and not like just protect the old people. But then it ends up being something like the Spanish flu that attacked the young people. And it ends up being something like malaria, which kills 20 or 30% of the people it infects, right? Or one of those, really crazy viruses. The next time a virus comes, we don't want to necessarily learn bad habits from our behavior here, or think that we overreacted.
But yeah, I 100% agree with that. The one thing I would contend you on is like, I'm glad that there are other parts of the world that are trying things differently than we are.
We can learn from it,
Right?
yeah,
Because we can learn from it either way.
mean,
You know, what the best way to go about it is.
In China, they're walking around on WeChat with with an indicator if they've had it, if they haven't had it. In Israel, they were tracking people through their phone if they had it or not. You knew all the people they came in contact with, and like Brandon said, Americans are not the type to kind of.
I'm not downloading that tracker app.
Yeah, you know, kind of like that. But that's been part of our downfall in this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
it's a bit worrying when they want to track you with an app and then they want to pump you with a vaccine as well. Do you see what I mean?
So there's so many people that are anti-vaccines and all these Bill Gates.
I'm not saying I am against it. I'm not against it, but I'm saying when you add all that stuff together, it's like, oh, which direction do you go?
Because,
like, you need to do your research to go, do I want that shit pumped into my arm, and do I want to have a chip, you know, hanging off my phone, following me wherever I go? Do you? You know, you've got to ask that question.
Well, Bill Gates is going to shoot chips into everyone from 5G towers.
Right.
Guys, this is when I wish we had some beers in front of us and we were just continuing this conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely that we could go all night on that one.
Yeah.
I'm sad sometimes by the ignorance of that we find in our country.
But the thing is, you've got to look at as well is that the social distancing for entertainment, whether that's sports, music, or whatever, we've got to look at that, because even when I'm looking at all the laws and everything with our events coming up, how do you play that one? Because what I'm kind of working out is effectively, if you take the capacity, you divide that by 3. So it's going to cost you almost 3 times as much to fulfill the ticket price of something. So suddenly there's less people in the venue because of the 2 meter distancing. Now we're reducing it over here. Suddenly our PM think it'd be a really good idea just to get a cloth over your mouth that you can make at home and travel on underground and transport as of next week. That's one of the things they're doing. But going to be interesting to see what's going to be the new normal for networking, for enjoyment, spending time around other people, and the costs associated to that. Because concerts and stuff are not going to be able to survive with 2 meter distancing between each, because they'll have to put the ticket price up. If they're putting the ticket price up and you've got a recession, it's going to be hard to sell those tickets. So where's the balance? Where can you see that balance in job?
I mean, it's a good question, Danny. I think for me, the thing that we really have to balance is that, like, from an economic standpoint, look, safety can always be, you can always extrapolate out to something that's extreme. I could put 1,000 mattresses on my car and drive 2 miles an hour and I'd probably be safe forever. Is that a practical reality going forward?
Of course not, yeah.
Likely no. Look, suicide hotlines are up higher than they've ever been. Domestic abuse is up higher. Depression is probably increasing. Unemployment's through the roof. At some point, we're going to have to find a threshold of risk that is appropriate for us to live with, and find a way to move forward and continue our lives in some way that is near normalcy. And at some point, I believe people will just rebel, right? They'll just be like, I need to see people. I need to act in a normal environment. I think there will always be a market for people willing to pay more, even during a recession. And there will certainly be a market for people who've been so starved of entertainment and collective joy for so long that they will take their last dollar and they'll go spend it on the concert that they want to go to.
Then it comes down to the experience and the vibe. Like, have you ever been to a nightclub where everyone's 2 meters apart? There's no vibe. There's no, when there's heat in the room, the DJ booth's there, and people have a few drinks where it's that vibe suddenly gets stretched out. It's a bit like when you may go to a football match of some kind and the crowd, like athletics, you've got the running track, and they've like this soccer stadium or football stadium pitch in the middle. The vibe's not there. It's when the crowd are on the pitch is where it really matters. And that level of social distancing is, you're right in what you're saying, people pay a premium, but how do you recreate that atmosphere if you're 2 meters apart?
Did you see yesterday the casinos opened in Vegas? Have you guys seen the videos?
I have not seen the videos now.
Holy shit. All right. You're talking about people rebelling, and then you're talking about people like willing to just say fuck it and go and go spend their money. Like, it looked like when we were there for a conference last year, right? Like, there are people there 1 out of 8 people are wearing a 3-ply mask, which do absolutely nothing if you're the only one wearing it, because it doesn't protect you, it just protects the people around you. And then, like you've got drinks and partying and girls dancing half naked on the bars and the atmosphere. And it's like, you can't tell that we're in the middle of this thing and that they just said, all right, we're open, let's go. And everyone was running over to Vegas to go. So I think you're going to have large parts of this country that, like you said, are just going to say, you know what, I'll take my chances because I think I'm going to be okay. And then you're going to have a natural balance of most of those people will be okay. 99.9% of those people will be okay.
So
and the economy in certain areas will thrive from that. But then in Massachusetts, where you guys are hit really hard, that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And you can't get insured for COVID. It's not covered. It's like there's no insurance for it either. So if you do that and it all goes wrong, that's the other thing you got to consider.
At a certain point, people are going to get fed up because at a certain point, people are going to say,
agree.
We were oversold how bad this was, and now we're under afraid, right? Now because we were oversold how bad this is, now we are not taking it seriously enough, and they're gonna.
For me, even to be honest with you, I felt a little bit of that urge, and I did I was so safe for so long, and I invited 3 of my friends from New York City. They actually all in medical research. They all got tested. I knew one of them had it. Right, he had it bad. He recovered, and he tested positive for the antibodies. My other friend never got it. His girlfriend, who's been living with together in Brooklyn every day since December 15th, she had it tested positive for the antibodies. He didn't get it. Right. Wow. I wanted to make first of all, a step out to my friend in a weird sort of way to say, like, I'm willing to hang out with you. You don't have a stigma around you. Right. And I'm willing to make calculated risks. I'm not running to a Costco when there's 10,000 people in there. That's not how I'm active. Like I'm making calculated risks, but all of us need some level of human connection, right? And you have to at some point make calculations of like, all right, I'm making this minor risk for my own sort of personal health and well-being.
Well, you know, there's some of the good things that people have been doing is like these drive-through. They're doing some events in the UK, like we don't have them over here like you have in the US. You know, like where people can just drive into a movie theatre in their car and watch it there. They've been doing some mini music events. Some of the festival organisers over here have been experimenting with that. But would it be nice if there's something? I know it's going to sound crazy, but is there like a protection mechanism where people can still be engaged in that way without being totally uncomfortable in doing so? Like you got the psychological aspect of it, right? We agree there is like that nervousness and stuff. But when we get to a stage, as stupid as it sounds, but like a suit and a visor, so that you can have that close proximity.
Listen, once there's a vaccine, I think a lot of that will
dissipate. Yeah.
Or once there is a proven once there's a treatment that reduces like the mortality of the disease even further. And can help reduce some of the symptoms. I think even if we get to that point, we don't necessarily have to have a vaccine. We just have to say that, hey, most of the people who are coming in are going out and they're relatively healthy, with the exception maybe like the exceptionally old, but then who knows how to correlate that with their other health problems, right? But if we get there, I think we'll get through it. But in that sense, but it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out more politically than actually the disease itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, Levan, so what are you doing now? Have you relaxed your own laws, if you like? Are you going outside? Are you going to the store? Are you forgetting and leaving the mask at home? Are you being lax with putting it in the right places?
I went to a Target a week ago, and I wore a mask and gloves, and they have a big line, so they're not letting in, a lot of people in at once. But that's like the first time I went to a store in a couple of months. I went to my brother's barbecue on Memorial Day weekend, but that's like a closed loop. He's not going anywhere either, and I trust that. So I can go see people who are in a closed loop. So yeah, I'm going out more now that the weather's good in New York, to some parks and things like that, but still keeping, for the most part, the social distance. Like Target, there were not a lot of people in there because they're restricting. So I wasn't around people sort of hovering on top of you, like that. So yeah, so I'm venturing out a little bit more, but still probably have been out a total of, 3 or 4 times in the last couple of months, out of my house in New York. So, but yeah, and also getting to the point of being like, all right, kind of like enough's enough. I need to get out of the house a little bit.
Yeah. For
And
your
I
own
think that's
sanity.
kind of a general feel.
Brandon, what about you? I know you've been quite militant with this all the way through, but have you relaxed your own personal law, if you like, the Brandon law? Your mic's off, mate.
I was going to say, so I think it's safe to go to the store. You know, like if you're, everyone in the store might be wearing a mask. Like Costco, I think is a fine example. They're restricting the number of people that go in it. You have to wear a mask to go inside. And I'm wearing a KN95 with like 97% filtration, like tested. So, I mean, I think I'm okay to do that occasionally. It's not my ideal thing. I'm still shopping mostly online. I'm still mostly staying closed loops like John. Like I know people like my mom and one of my employees, you know, like they're staying very, very diligent. So we're still around people. My son is with his mom, you know, half the week or, you know, most of the week during school, but now he's back with me half the week. And his mom is quarantined. So he's been going back and forth between us. So I think, you know, there's like I think the best way to approach this was always community based, which is, you know, your community is in your neighborhood is safe because everyone's tested and stayed safe, and so you can open up to that community and you guys can go eat together and enjoy things together and barbecue and be around each other and watch events if those ever start happening again. I'm hoping football gets started somehow.
I think we're all itching to get outside, aren't we? John, let's wrap here. What's the best way to reach you so they can sell their business to you, John?
Easiest way to reach me is just john@thraz.io, thras.io.
Yeah.
And I'll pass you guys on to our acquisition team.
Sounds good. Liran, new website been built for the PPC agency now, right?
Website's coming within a week. We're making some revisions, but Liran at Incrementum Digital, or you can hit me up on Facebook.
And the podcast?
Thank you. E-commerce Mindset Podcast.
Sounds good. Brandon, you, the course, consultancy, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, we're still doing, we have a special on our masterclass. It's, 5 hours. You can get it for just $1 still. Just use the code $1 all together, capital, and it's seller-systems.com/masterclass. You can watch that 5-hour class on how we look at data. And then we've got our Inner Circle Mastermind and stuff.
Cool. Gents, been lovely to see you. Liran, I'll see you back here Sunday, BST, 4 p.m. Yeah. We'll be doing a digital detox. So after this show, I'm going to shut down for a bit. When did you start in yours? You're going to be on your digital detox from tomorrow?
I will be. So last week I did 48 hours off all electronics, everything. And then I'll be doing that again for a little bit for 24 hours this weekend. Found it really good. I'll tell you all about it on Sunday.
Cool. All right, guys. Lovely to see you all. Stay well. Be safe. Everyone stay home. Be safe. See you. I won't be here tomorrow. We'll take a break, but don't forget Sunday. Mindset Sunday, Liran and Ash Thompson will be talking about digital detox. All right. Take care. See you soon.
All right, boys.
Bye.
See ya.
Take care.